Karter had been doing voices since he was 9 and had spent 23 years pretending it wasn't a real thing about him. That was the long and short of it. He didn't start because of some dramatic moment. No teacher spotted him. No agent stopped him in a corridor. No mysterious stranger said, "You've got a gift, kid." He started because Saturday mornings existed. Every weekend his dad made pancakes that were either perfect or offensive depending on his mood, and Karter sat on the living room floor in pajamas watching whatever animation was on. Disney films when he could get the VHS from his cousin. Dragon Ball Z on one of the channels that came through fuzzy if the aerial was touched right. Older cartoons in repeats. Then, later, anime he didn't fully understand but loved the sound of anyway. The voices got into him the way weather gets into a house through cracks nobody notices until winter. By 12 he could do Goku's yell well enough to terrify his grandmother through a wall. By 14 he was quietly repeating lines from films after they finished, alone in his bedroom, getting the rhythm slightly wrong then slightly less wrong than close. By 16 he had a notebook stuffed in his wardrobe with accents he was teaching himself and characters he'd invented. Not because he was organized. Because he couldn't help it. The trouble was, nobody around him thought any of that mattered. His family were not cruel. That was important to understand. They were not the kind of people who crushed dreams for sport. They were practical in the way lots of working families are practical, where practicality becomes a kind of armor because hope has historically let them down. His dad worked in facilities management at a hospital. Long hours, decent money, no imagination. His mom worked in a school office. His older sister was a nurse. His younger brother was doing an electrician's apprenticeship. Everybody did solid things. Things you could explain at a wedding without anyone tilting their head. Voice acting was not a solid thing. Voice acting was a thing people on the internet did, or people in America did, or people with famous parents did. Voice acting was not something a lad from the West Midlands whose voice had been described as quite deep, isn't it, by elderly relatives was supposed to want. So Karter buried it. Not dramatically. Not with some theatrical grief. He just stopped mentioning it, stopped performing at family things, stopped doing voices at school when people asked. He went quiet about the part of himself that was actually most alive. At 18 he did what sensible lads from his area did. He got a job in an office. Operations assistant for a logistics firm. Decent pay, decent hours, decent chance of being there in 20 years and not entirely hating it but not entirely living either. He was good at it. That was the annoying bit. He was reliable, organized, calm under pressure, easy to promote. By 22 he was team lead. By 26 he was operations manager. By 30 he was on a salary that let him rent a decent flat in Birmingham, run a car, take a holiday once a year, and feel mildly successful in the way success is measured by people who have never asked themselves what success actually means to them. And the whole time, the voices never left. He would do them in the car. In the shower. Walking home from the station. Small little experiments with pitch and rhythm and accent, almost unconscious. Sometimes he'd be halfway through a monologue in some invented character before he noticed an old woman at the bus stop staring at him like he was having a crisis. He'd been told more than once that he had a good voice. Women he'd dated mentioned it. Men at work mentioned it. His sister once said, "You should do audiobooks or something," in the tone of someone suggesting a hobby, not a life. Each time, Karter smiled and changed the subject. Because wanting something badly is one thing. Believing you're allowed to have it is another. The first burst of courage came when he was 27. He was watching a documentary about voice actors in a recording studio, and something about the casualness of it hit him. These people were not all classically trained. Some of them had come from comedy. Some from radio. Some from nothing. One woman had been a teacher until she was 35 and then just decided. That night Karter sat on his bed with his laptop open and searched voice acting classes in the UK. He found one in London. 6 weeks. Evening sessions. Reasonable but not cheap. He stared at it for 40 minutes. Then he closed the laptop, told himself he couldn't afford it, and went to sleep. That was the shape of his courage for years. It would arrive, flutter, and die. A small flame he kept stamping on because stamping on it felt safer than letting it spread. At 29 he tried again. This time he actually bought a cheap microphone on eBay, watched 4 tutorial videos about home recording, and recorded himself reading a monologue from a film he loved. He played it back expecting to cringe. He did cringe. But not as much as expected. There was something there. Something raw but real. His voice had a quality. A weight. He could hear the years of practice under the roughness. He almost posted it online. Almost. Then he imagined his mates finding it. His family seeing it. People at work asking him about it with that smile. That smile people give when they think you're being slightly embarrassing. He deleted the file. Then he recorded another one a month later and kept it. Then deleted that too. Then a year later he recorded a third one, listened to it twice, and saved it in a folder on his desktop called Stuff, as if vagueness protected him from being caught wanting something. By 31 he had a small graveyard of unfinished attempts. A folder of recordings he'd never shown anyone. A notebook of characters. A list of voice acting agencies he'd found online and never contacted. A podcast he'd started listening to about breaking into the industry that he told nobody about. A growing, painful awareness that he was running out of excuses that didn't sound like fear. The thing that finally shifted him was not inspirational. It was depressing. He was 31, sitting in a pub with 2 mates from work, both of whom were complaining about their jobs in that way men in their 30s complain when they have accepted that this is just life now. Mortgage, commute, meetings, retirement, done. Not unhappy exactly. Just settled. In the way that soil settles. You stop noticing you're sinking. One of them, Greg, said, "I always wanted to do something with music, but that ship sailed." The other, Tom, said, "I wanted to travel. Maybe next year." Karter said nothing. He drove home thinking about ship sailing. About the language people use to make peace with giving up. About how 31 was already feeling like a country he wasn't sure he'd chosen to live in. That night he opened the Stuff folder on his desktop. It had 19 recordings in it now. He listened to 3 of them, one after another, and heard something that surprised him. The most recent ones were good. Not perfect. Not polished. But there was a quality to them that couldn't be faked. A presence. A range. The kind of thing that comes from thousands of hours of doing something quietly and caring about it without being asked to. He thought, very clearly, if not now, when? And for the first time, he couldn't find an answer. Karter did not quit his job at 32 in some grand gesture. That would have been reckless, and recklessness is not the same as courage. He just started doing the work in addition. He signed up for an online voice acting course. Proper one. With feedback. With homework. With a tutor called Miriam who had done audiobooks for 15 years and spoke in that calm, tired voice of someone who had heard every possible excuse and was unmoved by all of them. He built a small home studio in his spare room. Not glamorous. A closet with foam panels, a slightly better microphone, a second-hand interface, and a blanket he hung over the door to dampen sound. His neighbor probably thought he was running a small cult. He recorded every evening after work. Sometimes for an hour. Sometimes longer. He practiced accents. Character voices. Commercial reads. Narration. He read books out loud. He listened to professional reels and tried to figure out what made them work. He submitted to small jobs on casting websites and got rejected from most of them. The first 6 months were brutal. Not because he was bad, though he was inconsistent. Because he was 32 and trying to enter an industry that idolized early starts, and he felt constantly behind. Like he'd turned up to a race that had started a decade ago and was now too proud to admit he was lost. He also hadn't told his family. Or his mates. Or anyone at work. This was partly shame. Partly strategy. Partly the simple truth that he couldn't handle the conversation yet. The "what are you doing," the "oh that's nice," the "bit of a pipe dream isn't it," the "my cousin tried that and now he sells windows," the silent looks. He knew exactly how it would go because he'd heard versions of it his whole life. Every time he'd let the voice thing surface, somebody had helped him push it back down. Not always cruelly. Sometimes with love. Sometimes with the slow, well-meaning disappointment of people who wanted him safe more than they wanted him fulfilled. At 33 he got his first paid job. £10. A 30-second voiceover for a local plumbing company's website. He spent 3 hours recording it. Probably over-engineered it. Sent it off, got the money, sat there staring at the email like it was a small miracle. £10. After months of work and rejection. He told nobody. A few months later he got a slightly bigger job. A corporate training video for a company that made industrial cleaning products. The script was so dry he had to read it 4 times to stay awake, but he got paid properly and got a credit. Then a small indie video game. 1 character. 50 lines. Low budget but real work. The director, a woman called Suki, said, "You've got something. Keep going." He nearly cried in his car afterwards. That one sentence did more for him than any amount of self-belief had managed. He started telling people. Not all at once. Not with some grand announcement. He told his sister first, because she was the most likely to be kind. She said, "Voice acting. Properly. Properly. How long have you been doing this?" "About a year." "Properly." "Longer if you count all the years I was too scared to." She stared at him. "You absolute weirdo. Why didn't you say?" "Because I knew what would happen." She didn't deny it. Their parents took it less smoothly. His mum said, "But you've got a good job, Karter." His dad said, "How much does it pay?" His brother said, "What, like cartoons and that?" Each question landed like a small stone. He'd expected worse. He'd also expected better. The thing about people who love you is that they can hurt you without meaning to, simply by measuring your dreams against the wrong scale. His mates were split. Greg said, "Fair play, mate." Genuinely. Which was nicer than expected. Tom said, "Are you still going to be able to come on the lads' holiday though?" Which was about as deep as Tom got. A couple of others were weird about it. Not mean exactly. Just uncomfortable. Like he'd broken some unspoken agreement about what they were all supposed to want. One of them said, "I always thought you were all right at voices, but isn't that a bit of a hobby to make a career?" Karter said, "Maybe. I'll find out." The second year was when he nearly quit. Not because of one big failure. Because of accumulation. Rejections stacked up. Auditions went nowhere. He spent money on coaching and got better slowly but not visibly. He got a few jobs but not enough to replace his income. He was working full-time, recording at night, exhausted most of the time, and slowly watching his savings shrink on equipment and courses and demo reels. Worse than the practical strain was the mental one. He had moments of deep, ugly doubt. Usually around 1 in the morning. "You're too old. You started too late. You're not that good really. People who were going to make it did it by 25. You're 33 and doing voices in a cupboard. Your dad was right. Your mates were right. You're a joke." He also had a terrible habit of comparing himself to voice actors who had been working since their teens. Looking at their careers was like staring at a road he hadn't taken and wishing he could walk backwards to a different starting point. What kept him going was not motivation. Motivation is a word people use when they haven't actually felt how thin it gets at 3 in the morning. What kept him going was smaller and more stubborn. The voices themselves. Every time he sat in that little foam-covered box and opened his mouth, something clicked into place that didn't click anywhere else in his life. Like a key finding its lock. He couldn't explain it to people who had never felt it. The work itself was the reason. The act of creating a character, inhabiting a voice that wasn't quite his but couldn't exist without him, that was the thing. He just had to keep showing up. By 34 he had a proper demo reel. Not a cheap one. One he'd paid for with a specialist producer who had recorded voice actors for 20 years. It cost money he shouldn't have spent. It also changed things. He got an agent. A small one. A woman called Diane who ran a boutique voice agency out of an office in Manchester and seemed to like him despite his late start. "You've got a voice people will trust," she said. "That's rarer than you'd think." Within 3 months of signing, he got a job narrating an audiobook. His first proper one. A thriller by an indie author. Not famous. Not bestseller. Real work, real pay, real credit. He spent 2 weeks in his little studio reading it out loud, taking breaks when his voice went, drinking water, trying not to think about how strange it was that someone was going to pay him to do the thing he'd done in secret since he was a child. When it came out, he listened to the first chapter and felt weirdly proud and weirdly exposed. His voice, out in the world. His name in the credits. He told his mom. She said, "Oh. That's nice, love. Is it on Amazon?" He laughed. "Yeah. Somewhere. I'll have a look. Your dad won't understand it, but I'll have a look." That was the most she'd ever given the thing. He took it. By 35, 2.5 years after committing properly, things started to feel real. He had an agent. He had credits. He had a small but growing reputation in indie game circles for character voices. He had done 2 more audiobooks. He had started getting cast in small animated projects, mostly web series and indie shorts, but real work. He had reduced his office job to part-time. He was not rich. He was not famous. He was making a modest living if he counted everything, but only just. And he was happier than he had been in his entire adult life. That was the part people didn't always understand when he tried to explain. He was not winning. He was not at the top. He was still unknown to most of the world. He still had months where work was thin and doubt was loud. He still compared himself to people further along and felt sick about the gap. But he was doing the thing. The actual thing he had wanted since he was 9 years old, watching Saturday morning cartoons on a living room floor, making up voices that nobody asked him to make and nobody paid him for and nobody believed were going anywhere. He was doing it. Late. Imperfectly. Without guarantees. But he was doing it. The thing that finally made him understand the lesson wasn't a success. It was a conversation. He was at his mom's house for Sunday dinner. His dad was there, his sister, his brother, the usual. After dinner, while his dad was in the garden pretending to know about roses, his sister pulled Karter aside in the kitchen. "I showed your audiobook to someone at work," she said. She listened to the whole thing over a week. Said she loved the narration. Karter blinked. "Really?" "Yeah." She asked if you'd done others. He didn't know what to say. He smiled and reached for a tea towel because he needed something to do with his hands. His sister watched him for a moment. "You know," she said, "I used to think you were a bit daft for doing this." "Thanks." "No, I mean. I thought you'd give up after 6 months. Most people do." He looked at her. "You didn't though," she said. And I think that's the actual thing. Not the voices. The not giving up. It was such a quiet sentence, but it landed hard. Because she was right. The talent mattered. The voice mattered. The practice mattered. But none of it would have mattered if he hadn't shown up, again and again, past the embarrassment and the doubt and the late starts and the quiet belief that he had already missed his chance. Later that evening, alone in his flat, Karter sat with his notebook. He didn't write anything profound. He just wrote one line at the top of a fresh page. "It's never too late to start. But you do have to start." He stared at it for a while. Then he thought about all the years he hadn't. The 20 spent convincing himself it was too late already. The buried recordings. The closed laptop. The deleted files. The fear that wanting something was the same as embarrassing yourself. All those years, wasted on the worry that he was too old or too ordinary or too late, when the actual tragedy would have been reaching 60 and never having tried at all. That was the lesson, really. Not that it's never too late in some cheerful inspirational way. But that late is still better than never, and never is the only thing that's actually too late. He had nearly let never win. That thought still visited him sometimes, in the quiet moments before sleep. The what if he'd never started. The version of him at 50, still working the same job, still doing voices in his car, still telling himself he'd missed his chance. That man existed in some parallel life, and Karter felt sorry for him in a way he couldn't fully articulate. 3 years after he'd committed, Karter got the call that changed things. Not in a movie way. Not a Spielberg director on the line. Just Diane, his agent, saying, "There's an animated series in pre-production. Streaming platform. Proper budget. They're casting supporting roles and I got you an audition." He almost didn't take the audition seriously. He'd been burned before. Small indie things that promised big and delivered nothing. But he prepped anyway. 3 characters. Different voices. Different energies. He recorded them in his little studio over 2 evenings, sent them off, and tried to forget about it. 2 weeks later Diane rang again. "You got a callback." He nearly dropped his phone. The callback was in London. A real studio. Real people. He sat in a waiting room with 4 other men who all looked more like voice actors than he did, in that way you convince yourself everyone else belongs somewhere more than you. When his turn came, he walked in and found 3 people behind a desk. The director, a woman with sharp eyes and a calm voice. The casting director, who looked tired in the way casting director